Welcome everyone to today's panel discussion on the 2020 AIA Victorian Heritage Awards, hosted by ACAHUCH, the Australian Centre for Architectural History, Urban and Cultural Heritage. Based within the Melbourne School of Design at the University of Melbourne, ACAHUCH is a research centre established to promote and undertake high-quality, collaborative and interdisciplinary research in the design, application, history, theory, politics and cultural significance of architectural, urban and cultural heritage. ACAHUCH facilitates and fosters industry partnerships and collaborations and serves to provide professional pathways for graduates of the Masters of Urban and Cultural Heritage program, which is delivered by the Melbourne School of Design. Additionally, starting in November this year in 2020, through the Melbourne School of Professional and Continuing Education here at the University of Melbourne, ACAHUCH will also be offering a suite of what we call micro-certs, an ideal introduction to cultural heritage practice and statutory heritage for practitioners, industry, future MUCH program students and the general public. And more details on that program can be found in the chat window link, which I'll put in shortly. Now, joining us today is Roger BEESTON, member of the AIA and jury chair for the AIA Heritage Architecture Panel, KERSTIN THOMPSON, principal of KTA and adjunct professor at RMIT and Monash Universities, Peter Lovell, founding director of Lovell Chen, TANIA DAVIDGE, president of Citizens for Melbourne and director of UPLA and Open House, and Peter MALATT, founding director of 6 Degrees, and all will be discussing their winning projects in this year's awards ceremony. Finally, I begin this afternoon's proceedings by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which this meeting is taking place, which may be multiple lands given the location of all of you today. And I pay my respects to those owners, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. Now, before we begin, I need to ask that if you have any questions, please direct them to the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page. And I'll endeavour to ensure that our panellists are all able to address your questions and comments. And now I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to Roger BEESTON for discussion of the jury process. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much, Philip, and greetings to everybody here today. Yes, I was the chair of the jury this year, and I am a practicing conservation architect, and it was a great privilege to be appointed the chair of the jury. The jury is tasked via the Institute of Architects with some key criteria that it needs to bring to consideration when deciding the relevant awards. And some of these criteria include, for example, the obvious compliance with the Borough Charter, the forensic discipline of investigating the heritage elements balanced with the interventions of new built fabric, the discipline applied to distill the heritage significance to inform the architectural solutions, and then more typical architectural considerations such as the dollars per square metre that has been expended, the conceptual framework underlying the principles, values, core ideas and philosophies of the project. This year, we had what I'm thinking must be a record of 22 projects entered into the category. And this is the second year that the Heritage Award has been expanded to recognise excellence in what I'm referring to as pure heritage conservation as a distinct endeavour from the equally important but typically more creative adaptive reuse. So there are actually two prizes. The projects involved significant heritage places which are extremely diverse in typology and age, and also in the level and the nature of interventions, ranging from very light touch to extensive re-envisaging. buildings, or places as conservation practitioners prefer to call them, ranged in type from very large civic edifices, commercial, community and healthcare premises, and private residences to modest outbuildings, and came not just from the Victorian and Federation eras, but also from well into the 20th century, including interwar and notably mid-century modernism. It's clear that heritage conservation, which was once a slightly marginalized specialist sector within the architecture profession, has now entered fully the mainstream. Another emerging trend is the increasing sophistication and scope of the built environment heritage conservation sector, now regularly including specialist sub-consultant material scientists and museum standard objects conservators, as well as the ongoing support of traditional crafts and trades such as stonemasonry, lead beating, and specialist applied finishes, to name a few. Heritage conservation is no longer seen as an oftentimes painful impediment to the realization of heroic contemporary architecture, but an important contributor to the whole built environment, which can sit comfortably and sensibly alongside contemporary architectural endeavor. Society now clearly embraces both the cultural but also the environmental and economic benefits attached to heritage conservation. And this is reflected in this year's Quantum of Quality projects in the AIA Awards Heritage category. All entrants are congratulated, and the job of, I need to add that the job of the jury was particularly difficult this year in that we were not able to go and actually visit the sites, and we relied on this technology we're enjoying today, the virtual presentation of the projects. So if we didn't quite get it right, then please forgive us for that reason. Thank you. That's my initial introductory comments.
Very much, Roger. And it's now my great pleasure to be able to introduce TANIA DAVIDGE to give her presentation.
Okay. Can everybody see that? Is that good?
Yes, that's great, TANIA. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, the award that we won this year is a little bit outside of your kind of normal heritage architecture award. We won, and I'll go into who we are in a second, the Bates Smart Award for Architecture and the Media for Advocacy. And I'd just like to say that without advocacy, we probably wouldn't have a lot of the beautiful heritage buildings we have in Melbourne today. So it was quite interesting to win this award, and it's quite interesting to be speaking on this panel amongst these amazing people. So the Bates Smart Award for Architecture and the Media is an award for public engagement with architecture. So for example, Justine Clark won it for her body of work as the editor of Architecture Australia a few years back. And Peter Madison's also won it for his work with Grand Designs. And I've previously won the Bates Smart Award with Dr. Christine Phillips for an exhibition that we put on in 2009 called Ads for Architecture, which was held in the Fed Square atrium, and it's part of my enduring attachment to the place. But I'm here today as the president of a public space advocacy group, the Citizens for Melbourne, and we won the award for the Our City, Our Square campaign, which opposed the demolition of the Yarra building at Federation Square and the building of an Apple store. So just briefly, what happened was 3 working days before Christmas in 2017, the state government announced that Fed Square's Yarra building would be demolished to make way for an Apple store. It was going to look like this initially. The announcement cut the people and the City of Melbourne out of the decision-making process, and public outrage ensued. 3 petitions went up on change.org opposing the proposal, and of these 3 petitions we hold 2, and they accumulated over 100,000 signatures. And so the Citizens of Melbourne were formed from a group of people who'd been vocal in some way about the issue, and our aim was and is still to foster conversation about and advocate for public space in metropolitan Melbourne, and to act as a voice for and give voice to the people who opposed the Apple store proposal, because the way the proposal was implemented, there was no public comment to be allowed in relation to the issue. So what was the issue? Well, we were really concerned about what an Apple store meant for Federation Square as a public space and a space for building community. Fed Square is a space that's formed by a suite of buildings, as I think most of us know, all of which have minimal signage and no real advertising on them. Together they frame the square, they hold you in, and they form the backdrop for the public activity that happens in the square. No other place designated for the public works like Fed Square in the City of Melbourne. It's different to a public park or the Botanic Gardens or a museum or an art gallery. It's absolutely unique in Melbourne's network of public spaces and buildings. So what did we do to win this advocacy award? Oh, sorry, we basically didn't want to see that beautiful building turn into that. So what did we do to win this award? Well, we set up a website and we laid out 7 key principles. Between the petitions, our email list and our social media, our campaign reached approximately 50,000 people. We made and facilitated public submissions to politicians at all levels of government, local, state and federal. We gave numerous talks in many different forums. We were active on social media. We wrote articles and provided commentary for newspapers, online publications, television and radio, and we gained international and national coverage. We launched a poster campaign, which you can see here, in association with the City of Melbourne Lord Mayoral by-election. We facilitated a flash mob where we all chased someone dressed up in an apple costume around Federation Square and yelled, "Juice the apple, juice, juice the apple." And we held, I suppose, the more traditional rally at Fed Square on a cold and rainy September evening. And this is a photo of the rally. It's one of my favourite moments of the campaign, and it's Dimity Reid and Peter Davidson talking in the square. We crowdfunded and we sold t-shirts, and Peter Davidson kindly lent us this beautiful design of his for that. And we developed with our list a people's plan for Federation Square, and we used it as the basis of our advocacy through the review process, which has recently been concluded by the state government, and it's a fantastic outcome for Fed Square. We participated in the state election and we won some other awards as well. This is us at the ACAHUCH Team Awards. I think what was really crucial was that we participated and supported the Heritage nomination. So the National Trust recommended Fed Square to the State Heritage Register, which was a key component of the campaign. And it was really wonderful to participate in the Heritage hearings. It's something I'd never done before. And I'd really love to thank Felicity Watson and Caitlin Metropolis for helping me with all the questions I had about making our submission to the Heritage Council. So Fed Square was finally listed under 5 heritage criteria. It was listed for its architectural excellence, its high degree of technical achievement, its importance to the course or pattern of Victoria's cultural history, its strong significance to the Victorian community, and as a notable and highly intact example of a public square. And although our group were architects, our submission focused primarily on the historical and social significance of the square and its importance as a public space. In fact, I analysed over 3,800 petition comments to support the fact that Fed Square was socially significant and should be listed as a notable example of a public square. And it was really interesting because at the time we were doing this, the Heritage Council were reviewing their guidelines around social significance. So it came at a very interesting time. And mainly the reason that we thought the social significance was so important was because for us, it wasn't simply about saving a building, but it was about saving one of Melbourne's most important public spaces. And heritage was in fact a turning point in Fed Square's story for more than one reason, because what it did was it reintroduced the planning process, which meant that people again had a say in the process. Because what happened was Fed Square's then management applied for a heritage permit to demolish the Yarra building, because that's what they had to do when the heritage process kicked off. And when this happened, we facilitated over 2,300 submissions objecting to the permit and made a detailed submission on behalf of our association. So in total, Heritage Victoria received 3,418 submissions, and I think the large proportion of them, if not all of them, were objections to the proposal. And this letter that you see on the screen is Heritage Victoria refusing to grant Fed Square management a permit to demolish the Yarra building and to replace it with an Apple store. And when this happened, Apple pulled out and we won. And the government announced a review of Fed Square's governance, finances, built form and purpose. And what was really interesting during this process is through this process we made friends and allies. Fed Square brought us all together as a group, and together with many of the other people who were part of this fight. It was a really interesting coalition of people, and it changed the way I think about advocacy. I used to think of advocacy more in terms of the top down, and now I think about it more in terms of an ecology from the bottom up. So our campaign has shown us what Fed Square means to tens of thousands of people, and it demonstrated Fed Square's significance to the people of Victoria and beyond. And for me, this community significance is key to Federation Square's ongoing relevance. For me, public space is socially produced, and public activity is what brings public space to life. And I think that when we talk about heritage, we can see a similar thing happening with heritage. Heritage is also socially produced. Sometimes we add or renovate the heritage factor, and the passion that we feel for the place disappears. So, you know, people are really integral and important in terms of heritage. And that's where I'd like to leave it. Thank you.
Tania, thanks so much. Fantastic. And congratulations on the award. Really
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm now going to introduce Peter MALATT of 6 Degrees. So Peter, are you ready to join us?
Hi, Philip. Yes, I am.
Great.
I think Simon's going to share my presentation.
Right.
Very wise.
A good man knows his limitations. Thanks for the invitation, Melbourne Uni. It's great to have the chance to present. 6 Degrees has been working with RMIT on the Capitol Theatre since 1999. We did a master plan in 1999. And this project really encompasses all of the objectives of that master plan, which include renovation of the theatre, the cinema itself, upgrade of all the foyers, including the derelict middle foyer and upper foyer, and upgrading of the fly tower so that it's much more of a multifunction venue than it has been in the past 20 years. So the history of it is RMIT bought the theatre as a lecture theatre, and 6 Degrees have done a series of minor works to safety upgrades and digital projection upgrades over the years to enable that to be used. But by about 2016, I think it was really getting into a derelict state, and they mothballed it. And it was actually assessed for possible sale, but then Martin Hook got involved and talked to the new VC, and he said, "Well, why would we sell it? Why wouldn't we keep this asset and really make something of it?" So we've got to congratulate RMIT, and the state government stepped in with some money as well, just for really backing this project, because it's really an asset for the whole city. This is a shot of the front canopy. The front canopy's, I think, the only cantilevered concrete canopy in Melbourne. The building was completed in 1924. It's the work of Walter Belly Griffin and Marion Marnie, probably their best work, arguably. Short the changes from the 1960s, which we did lose quite significant areas of the bottom of the theatre. But if you go on to the next one, Simon, I'll be pretty quick after this. The canopy was upgraded as part of the works. This is a quote from Robin Boyd: "The best cinema that was ever built or ever likely to be built." Robin was instrumental in preserving the theatre at a time where it was threatened with demolition in the 1960s. The sort of compromise at that point was that the lower section of the theatre was demolished and the arcade put in, which increased the financial viability of the building. So although we lost the lower portion of the theatre and the original configuration, we did get to keep the key elements of the building, including obviously the ceiling and the auditorium itself. Next. Some original shots. Probably the one on the left is the earliest one, which shows the original carpet, which we we were able to remanufacture as part of the works. We had a sample of that which we could sample and copy. Next. The building was very, very tired, and the upper foyers have never been refurbished, so they were still in pretty much a derelict state, and not really up to fire safety or any other standards. So there was a lot of work to do in the upper heritage parts of the building. The lower section of the building is largely 1960s construction, so in that area we had a bit more design freedom as to how we approached the job. Next. This is a section through the foyers, and you can see in the lower section that's really 1960s fabric, where the steps come up from the arcade, and a flat section of foyer, which was originally part of the seating of the theatre. The two upper foyers are the ones which were derelict and were restored as part of these works, along with the auditorium and the fly tower. Next. It's a section of the building which just shows its spatial complexity. The basement level is original, the arcade level is 1960s, and the foyer above it is 1960s. But the main elements of the building above that are largely heritage fabric, and you can see the scale of the fly tower at the rear, which was stripped out and repurposed so that the building has many more functional options these days other than just theatre. So the new screen that we've installed is a roll-up screen, so the building's much more functional now. And with the refurbishment of the foyers, which are on the right-hand side of the view, it's much better serviced for functions and multi-purpose events, and they've been also equipped for teaching and learning as well. Next. I won't dwell on the plans, but one of the most difficult aspects was introducing all the new mechanical services into those upper foyers, and also we inserted a new lift, which is an extremely difficult technical thing to do within the constraints of the heritage work. But we did find one little spot which was like threading the eye of a needle to connect all of the four levels of the building together. Next. This is a view of the entrance. We've introduced a lot more glazing into the 1960s foyer, so that you get a view from the arcade entrance up through the building and into the beginnings of the heritage fabric of the building, like that column with the dentils on it, through the window. And generally the materials we used for those new works were naturally finished steel, just in contrast to the heritage fabric. Next. This is the 1960s foyer. Everything above this is heritage fabric, so that was all restored. And there's a sample of the heritage carpet used there just to lead you into the theatre. Next. This is the upper foyer. So these areas were derelict and were completely restored. The entire building was scaffolded out, and look, the degree of difficulty was 9.9. Everything had to come in those front stairs or in a roller door 1 story up from the lane at the back. So the builder, Hutchison's, did an absolutely amazing job. Next. There were some safety issues to address, like balustrading heights, but generally these were restoration areas and technical upgrades with air conditioning and kitchens and finishes throughout. Next. The auditorium itself was fully scaffolded, and all of the plaster work was refurbished, and all of the lighting's been replaced with a much lower energy multicoloured LED strip lighting system. The ceiling itself is almost entirely plaster, traditional horsehair reinforced plaster. And look, there was some areas of restoration, but in general, this was just the scope of the work was really the big challenge. The scaffolding had to come up and down twice, and it was a huge job. Next. We did restore what we could of the heritage fabric, such as these upper heritage toilets. Next. And really the crown of the building is this amazing spatial experience within the theatre itself. So Mariam Mani, whose name is all over the drawings, I have to say, it is the legacy of the Griffins in Australia, one of their key works in the world. Trevor Huggard tried to get this up for World Heritage listing at one point when he was Lord Mayor, but unfortunately it failed on the basis of the 1960s work. But I still consider it a work of really world importance in the Chicago school. Next. The lighting system is almost infinitely variable now, as opposed to the 4-colour system that it used to have. Next. And there's just a couple of shots to finish of the ceiling. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Peter. A fantastic, an extraordinary job. And for those of us who were lucky to be at the official launch, it was a spectacular show. And I think RMIT University really needs to be congratulated for what a stunning job it has enabled 6 Degrees to do here. It's my very great pleasure now to introduce to you KERSTIN THOMPSON of KTA, who will be talking about the major award of the entire awards program, the Victorian Architecture Medal. Thank you, KERSTIN.
Okay, well, thank you for the chance to present this today. I must say this is probably the heritage fabric that in architectural terms is the least significant, but I liked Tania's comment before about socially produced heritage significance. There was a few purposes to this work. First of all was to reinstate the suburban civic grandeur of the building from when it was first built in 1964 and seen as something that was fairly ambitious as a project from these thistle fields that were once there, friendly, lovingly known as the Pink Elephant, the Murray, Forster and Walsh building as it first appeared. Some of the photos John's done, John Gollings took of it before the works. And interestingly, sadly, when we started, it was in this state of abandonment, really, used as a furniture store for the council. So a real question of obsolescence, what it means for these huge structures to just be left abandoned and misused. So clearly a restoration of its significance in its suburban life was very important. The next purpose was about collecting community memories, and this is where its social significance is the primary, really, in this project. Just an array of the ways in which it has connected with people and enabled different aspects of life to be played out in Broadmeadows, whether it was for debutante balls, the car club, sports groups, citizenship ceremonies, Gough Whitlam speeches, AC/DC concerts, and so on. So no surprise the campaign that was done by the community to hold the building or keep the building when it was under threat of demolition. The next purpose was to transform place and use, and one of the things we think a lot about with heritage projects is the degree to which the main change will come about through program change and or through fabric change. And in this instance, yes, some change to fabric and also some change to use. So the original design was primarily just a town hall, as in with a kitchen, stage and foyer facilities, which you can see in these early drawings. And what this new work was about was enabling it to function for other purposes as well, to open it to a much broader demographic and a range of uses. So a series of cuts and additions were the main ways in which we're able to transform its purpose and impact. It's a building very much of its time in the 60s, where car was king. So building in a sea of car park was the default. And so one of our imperatives in terms of placemaking was to introduce a new commercial spine to complement the civic one, and to make more of the space around the perimeter of the building as a place of value for people, not just cars. So some of the key changes: the north-south commercial street introduced for commercial uses to the west side, and then just race through these. And then in the section, you can see here the range of other purposes. So office, commercial, business incubator, meeting room, town hall as well, a gallery space, and reception event spaces. So much more of a hybrid of civic, cultural, and commercial uses. And that leads to this intention to engage many, to be open to a very broad community. It's a very wide community, as you can imagine. Some before and afters to show you the degree of transformation. So the north side was always quite closed, and so in these new works, the purpose was to open it up, to make a more informal one to complement its more official, formal eastern facade. The big bullseye, which was a way to showcase more of what was happening inside the hall by this big cut into that north facade. So before and after the north-south street, you can see there. And excuse me, the use of the circle was a way to, if you like, counter the sort of modern Art Deco language of the original building. So clearly a new move and very much about changing its transparency. The new addition to the south, which is part of that commercial block, gave it some roadside presence. Again, this was about reminding the community of the significance of the building and its availability to them and their future uses. So the sort of light box and its potential to communicate with the community from the road as much as from the north. Some of the before and afters internally, the stair was a very loved element within the project. So addressing compliance issues now, but maintaining its importance in those foyer spaces. The shift from the supper room to the little gallery insertion, for instance, that you can see there. And this sort of opening up of the building to the community to make it, you know, having informal purpose as well as more formal events. Before and after the supper room, and then after the business incubator, which is a big part of the community employment opportunities embedded in the project brief, which we can see through here, the stair holding on to that treasured balustrade, and this introduction of the bar to make those foyer spaces double up as more event spaces as well. The handsomeness of the original proportions, just making sure that they were really celebrated in the new works. In the bar, which is inserted in that features some of the original cladding from the stage. So one of the key things for us was how the building has is a way to trigger the memories of people, if you like, and their histories lived through the building, and also the way in which photographs taken in the town hall and the building is a backdrop to people's lives. So that's where some of the materials, whether it's the brickwork or the old stage fabric, or even the curtains from the stage which reappear here, became important to hold on to. That the palette, the material palette, was a way of reminding and connecting people with their past. So the before and after of the new town hall part of it, again, very, very handsome proportions. So really it's just to celebrate and make the most of those in the new works. And then the way in which this part connects through to the commercial spine and the commercial space to the west of the building. That very changed relationship between inside and outside and the placemaking. And just to finish up, the work of Robbie Rowlands commissioned after some engagement with the community and the stories that he heard about that, he did this piece called Crossing the Floor. This is the old supper room. Took a cut, used a way of exposing the ground, the sort of ancient ground beneath the building, and then transforming that into the piece that you saw in that foyer. And so I think as a further initiative of different ways in which both the architecture and this artwork could engage with people's memories as a kind of cultural repository is really fundamental to what the project is about. And just to finish up, I would say right now, as we're all in our moments of isolation, you realise just how important these sorts of civic buildings and spaces are that are explicitly public buildings as places to gather. So we really wait with bated breath for when this can be used once again. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, and an extraordinary job, and I think a very worthy winner of the Victorian Architecture Medal for this year. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Peter Lovell.
Philip, thank you very much. And I'll just share the screen. Thank you. And thanks ACAHUCH and the Institute of Architects. Lovell were the recipient of 2 awards, and they're awards very much in the tradition of heritage and conservation. And it's interesting, having heard the previous speakers, to look at the comparison and contemplate the differences. The first of the awards was related to conservation in a very traditional sense, and this was for Trades Hall in Victoria. Trades Hall is a building that was built over many, many stages, reflecting in many ways the peripatetic nature of Trades Hall of funding. It was designed by Joseph Reed, developed in 10 stages between 1874 and 1925. What was fascinating about this project was really the degree to which the client engaged with it and the trade union movement. And this is a project that was very much seen as work that was long overdue on what is referred to as the People's Parliament by the trade union movement. And so it was a project that had a high degree of being embraced by the movement. The project was really about 2 aspects. One was very much focused on traditional conservation, and the project was funded in large part by the Living Heritage funds from Heritage Victoria, but also by the union movement itself. And it also had basic upgrade works, provision of a lift and upgrading general facilities. In the main work, a lot of the work was about representing the building. This is a building that internally reflects this evolved form. So you have high boom Victorian architecture, you have 1920s interiors, and you have everything in between. And so it was a project of discovery, of revealing and understanding what was there. The main focus of the projects were 4 spaces: the old council chamber, the new council chamber, the old ballroom and the new ballroom. And it's interesting to reflect that Trades Hall as a building was all about trades and education. So while the union movement and its imperatives were fundamental, the 8-hour day movement, the basic building, though, was about teaching, about meeting, about gathering, about conversation. And so that these 4 spaces, 2 council chambers, 2 ballrooms, were all about this engagement. The project started with a conservation management plan, a detailed investigation of the fabric that was there, which in many respects was very derelict. The trade union movement has ebbed and flowed in terms of their interest in supporting Trades Hall in terms of dollars, so that it was certainly in a state of decline. And so there was a lot of very detailed investigation work that led to, in some respects, a quite traditional delivery of a conservation project, removing later accretions, revealing spaces as they had been, but spaces that needed to function in a contemporary way, so that the old ballroom had traditionally been the trade union bar space for a long time, refurbished but reoccupied as a bar. The new ballroom, in the same way, a space that had had a variety of uses, including radio station, was refurbished, revealed, and in many respects the heritage response was interpretive, and so light fittings were interpretive of the sort of fittings that could have been there, were there. But again, embraced as a completed space, as a very functional space, not a museum. The main work in terms of the decorative work that was undertaken in this project was in the old council chamber and the new council chamber. And this is a view of the old council chamber as it was in the late 19th century, a highly decorated space delivered by Patterson Brothers, one of the high style decorators of the late 19th century in Melbourne. And this is the space as we had it. So the only evidence of the decoration was, in fact, some very discoloured lunettes above these doorways, a panel of the original stencil decoration behind later wall painting where there'd been a screen, and then otherwise it was devoid of the original decoration, but retained the original horseshoe-shaped form, the benches, from the layout of the first council chamber. And so the process was a meticulous, traditional and highly technical piece of conservation involving the Grimwaite Centre in analysing finishes, and in the process of how to go about revealing things. And what we discovered was a whole series of decorations beneath many layers of paint, images of the muses, process of revealing the original damask style treatment done as a wall stencil, the individual images of individuals important to the trade union movement in the frieze. So that this was a project about investigation, high-end conservation applied in terms of analysis, finishes, materials. So everything from black japanning on floors to the treatment of traditional benches, etc. What has been a joy in this room is that not only has the union movement hugely embraced the restored room, but they do use it all the time. So it is actually used for meetings, conversations, and it is being hugely embraced. The other aspect of this project was in the new council chamber. These are just images of the restored and conserved room, and this wonderful thing of revealing material rather than repainting. So this is all about removing layers of paint and revealing what was there. The other aspect was the Solidarity Hall, the new, what's known as the new council chamber. And this was a voyage of discovery. This is a room that had had a major fire in it in the 1920s, and the original room had been substantially destroyed. This is what it had looked like, and it was a room covered with memorial boards that were depicting the history of the union movement, the various committees, individuals who were responsible for the different unions. This is the original plan of the room, a horseshoe-shaped room, orientated north-south rather than east-west. And the fire destroyed it, had a lantern above it. The fire destroyed the entirety of the room, but left fragments. This was the rebuild in the 1960s when the room was reoriented to the east-west orientation. And you can see a glimpse behind this metal cladding that was put on in the 60s of what was left, these fragments of that original room. And as we began to unpick it, what we realized is there was far more of the original room left behind the 1960s makeover. And in a heritage sense, one of the questions was, well, do you leave the 1960s and reveal this fragment, or do you think about reversing this process? And it's a choice. It's not one that there was necessarily a right or wrong. The decision was made to say, no, we want to reorientate to the north-south direction and reveal this archaeology, if you like, of the earlier room. And so that we undressed, if you like, the space, we took away the 60s and we revealed this extraordinary wall of past presidents, the whole history of the unions up to the 1900s. And in the process, in a sense, reformed the space. So we did, the entire room is now an interpretation of what had been there, but it has revealed this archaeology of the earlier room. And so that the finished room at the opening, greatly embraced by the union movement, now adopted, called Solidarity Hall, and an entirely new space for the union movement within Trades Hall. So this project was a lovely one of discovery, but it's one where this vast client body has embraced very much this whole process of restoration. The other project, which is quite different, is the Regent Theatre. And this award was a Creative Adaptation Award. And it's interesting in MALATT's project, The Capitol, because these are two picture palaces built at the same time. One was straight Hollywood fantasy, the Regent Theatre, and one was incredibly advanced, high-style architecture of the Griffins. And they are chalk and cheese architecturally, but they both were delivering this idea of the fantasy of moving into a theatre building and the expectation of being transformed as you did. The Regent Theatre has a long history, a building constructed in 29. It was then one of the three major picture palaces in Melbourne, along with the Forum, which was the State Theatre, and the Capitol and the Palais. It was hugely celebrated, a single screen in the main auditorium and the plaza below down in the basement, 2 theatres. It was gutted by fire in 1945 and was rebuilt in 1947 in the auditorium, and this is part of the rebuilding process at that time. The building was then, in fact, closed as a theatre in 1970, and those who would remember, it was left for 26 years simply as a gutted shell. And it was saved by the process of the Green bans and the BLF bans on demolition. There was a massive fight over it, and it was just left, simply part of a fragment used for the city square. In the 1990s, a huge program of works was undertaken to restore it, and the state government and council, who own the building, Mariners are the long-term lessees, refurbished it in 1997. This project was about a further transformation of this building to improve its ability to perform as a lyric theatre. And the challenge of this project in the 90s was all about the transformation of a 3,800 seat auditorium into a lyric theatre. How do you make this into a live theatre? That transformation occurred then, but one of the major gaps was that there is a huge space between the stage and people sitting in the dress circle. And so this project was all about bringing the dress circle forward by 3.7 metres towards the stage, which from an operational point of view was fundamental to getting the theatre to really be able to have the shows that Hollywood and London were saying, sorry, New York and London were saying needed to be in it, and Melbourne wanted to host. And so that this was a very ambitious project to, in fact, pull out the entirety of the front of the dress circle and move it forward. And so you can see in this diagram, what seems a very modest shift has transformed the whole relationship of the audience to the stage. It was a project driven by massive concerns about structure and structural sufficiencies. The new structure we've put in weighs about 110 tonnes just for the steel, and it had to be assembled above an operating plaza ballroom below. So we put in the steel truss is composed of 10 massive 4-tonne individual elements that are then linked together, and the whole of the dress circle's been extended forward. The project had, as a driver, it had to reopen on an exact date, so that this was a construction project where there was no ability for slippage. It was a 7-day-a-week, on occasions 24-hour-a-day construction site, because to deliver it, the builders had no ability to move from their delivery date. And so it had massive challenges in it. The design of all of this structure was entirely governed to the millimetre by sight lines. So the actual drop in the truss, it dropped 6 millimetres when it was finally, the structure was removed supporting it, and that had to be accommodated in the designing of the whole thing to get the sight lines right. The project then involved a massive amount of really extending and rethinking the decorative ornament. And again, from a heritage point of view, this was all about questions of authenticity and what is important about when you intervene in a building like this, whether you do an interpretive response, whether you do something that's in the tradition of, or whether the idea is disguise. And in a building built as a theatre where it is all about fantasy, the direction taken was one of maintaining that fantasy in a quite literal way, so that we chose to, in a sense, continue the traditions, both physically in the plaster work is all done in traditional fibrous plaster, the mouldings, and the decorative work, which is hugely complex. I think we had a band of something like 30 painters working all the time to reproduce what is one of the most extraordinary bits of 1920s decoration, so that there is an entire story in itself in the rediscovery of scumbling, of detailing, of gilding techniques to achieve these effects. Carpets were pattern matched as before and refined, seating, was replaced, and the entire building was refurbished in that sense. And the intent very much in these images from 1929 to 1947 to 2020, this maintenance of this spectacle of the picture palace, but very much repurposed as use as a lyric theatre. And this 3.7 metre move, which you cannot distinguish in any way now, but so fundamental to maintaining this place as a viable heritage building. And so it was an extraordinary project in that sense, in that it was the challenge of the philosophy to it, this precision in delivery, and then this final outcome of hopefully giving this building certainly another 100 years life. Philip, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Peter, and two remarkable, I have to say, jobs, both done exceptionally well. I'd now like to move on to return to Roger Beeston, but just before I welcome Roger back, please, if you have any questions, please direct them to the Q&A function, and we do have time in the process today to follow through with some questions. Look, I might jump in first I'd like to ask Tania Davidge about the Citizens for Melbourne. I mean, it's a fantastic outcome for Federation Square, but is the battle over at Federation Square?
I definitely think there are a few things left to be done that we're going to follow up on. The review was announced recently, and the government are taking up all of the suggestions from the review, and also funding some work to Fed Square, I think to the tune of $20 million, which is fantastic. And Fed Square's also moved into the portfolio for the creative industries from major projects and tourism. And we think that that's an amazing outcome, and it's where Fed Square should belong, because community should come first, and I think tourism is a flow-on effect of that, but Fed Square is just so important to the Victorian community that placing it in that portfolio is a really, really wonderful move. We've been invited to kind of participate in some of the things that are going on around the review of the Charter, and some other documents that will act as guidelines for Fed Square. And we will do that because we advocated for it. So we're really looking forward to participating in that part of the process.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks, Tania. So we'll return to Roger. Already. It looks like you're sharing your screen.
I've succeeded. Great.
Yep.
Okay. As I said, I'm going to talk to you about the 8 projects. So firstly, the jury's comments regarding the John George Knight Award for the Broadmeadows Town Hall. The Broadmeadows Town Hall refurbishment project, we said, is an exemplar of both conservation and adaptive reuse of a mid-century modernist former town hall and municipal offices, which had become obsolete and was on the cusp of demolition. Mid-century architecture globally is just beginning to become more widely recognised as being of heritage value, being stylistically so distinct from its predecessors, and in terms of history, relatively recent. This epoch is providing heritage practitioners and authorities alike with many exciting challenges, including in this instance, the not uncommon circumstance of a lack of any formal statutory heritage recognition. The Broadmeadows Town Hall, fondly locally named the Pink Elephant, was saved and revived by local community sentiment, combined with the powerful and comprehensive research by KTA to establish the heritage values of the place, not just purely the architectural aesthetic, but the associative, intangible social values, and to capture and enhance them. Once equipped with this core knowledge, KTA were in a position to confidently both critically conserve and also to boldly add to the complex, bringing it up to code, providing legible interpretive experiences, and guaranteeing the place a sustainable future, all resulting in an outstanding but sensitive revival. And all without imposed statutory heritage controls. It's a remarkable and groundbreaking project. Sorry, I was meant to be flicking through my slides as I. There were two awards given for conservation. The first of which was the State Library and equally Trades Hall. Unfortunately, we've not had a presentation about the State Library today, but nonetheless, this is what the jury had to say. While this massive investment in one of our most treasured 19th century civic landmarks inevitably involved substantial new programming and associative adaptive reuse interventions, all of which appear to have been highly successful, it's been the forensic conservation efforts which have most impressed the jury in this instance. Particularly Queen's Hall, which we can see here, where very detailed forensic investigations took place to reveal the original decorative paint scheme by Edward Latrobe Bateman. The resultant decision to remove the extant 1980s highly flamboyant faux heritage decorative scheme and to reveal and conserve earlier and original decorative schemes within a modest contemporary interpretive scheme was judiciously handled. Additionally, the jury was impressed with the restoration of the roof lights in this space. Conservation Heritage Award is intended to highlight and acknowledge these forensic interventions into the heritage place, which are often barely noticeable, but which are nonetheless born of deep research, science, and careful contemplation. The result of these interventions is typically the difference between a diminution, when poorly handled, and an enhancement of the legibility of the heritage value. From the clever and subtle manner of bringing the West Wing stairs into compulsory contemporary code compliance, to the manner in which the intensive new services have been integrated into the Victorian interior, never designed to accommodate such interventions, this project has succeeded impressively and is a testament to the excellent relationship that has prevailed between Architectus, the design architects, and Andronis Conservation. The second conservation project was for Trades Hall, and the jury said this: in collaboration with specialist materials conservators from the Grimwade Centre at the University of Melbourne, LOVELL heritage architects have carefully peeled back, conserved and interpreted the hitherto hidden, richly detailed 19th century layers to the interior of this working person's architectural icon with celebrated forensic care. The refurbishment of the new council chamber, Solidarity Hall, involving the removal of the deemed to be intrusive 1960s layers and the reversion back to its previous 19th century presentation with some contemporary additions, which included conserving wall treatments found behind the 1960s walls, was particularly applauded, as was the introduction of museum standard interpretive displays. Other notable interiors were to the old council chambers, the new and old ballrooms, offices and circulation spaces, while it was also acknowledged that the less glamorous basics, such as ensuring the ongoing functionality of the complex slate-clad roofing system, was also deftly handled. And moving to the creative adaptation awards, there were two of these granted. One for the Abbotsford Convent and the other for the Regent Theatre. The jury had this to say about the Abbotsford Convent. Working to a very modest budget funded by Heritage Victoria, the latest in a series of conservation and adaptive reuse projects at this nationally significant heritage and landmark complex, now in community use, WBA, in conjunction with specialist finishers and buildings conservators, have successfully navigated a complex brief to deliver a sensitive new use to a 19th century industrial site with a sometimes gritty and complex history, referred to as the North Laundry. The careful historic finishes investigations, which after analysis had been partially retained as palimpsestuous interpretive panels or patches, and the detailed documentary evidence captured in the Conservation Management Plan, have enabled a successful reveal and conservation of the several key layers or chapters of the story of this place to be achieved with panache, including a rare instance of lead paint finishes consolidation as distinct from its usual abatement or remediation. WBA, Williams and Bogue, have made several crafted but bold moves to bring the formerly toxic, debilitated and dangerous laundry complex into contemporary multi-purpose performance and exhibition space, allowing each of the key historic building fabric layers to remain legible while adding seamlessly to the next. And the Regent Theatre, which interestingly was given an award for adaptation, we felt that that was the most applicable award for this project, although it could have easily gone the other way and been given an award for some of the conservation efforts as well. But it was really the adaptive changes that we felt needed to be celebrated. So, as Peter said, originally constructed in 1929 as the flagship of the Hoyt cinema chain, but then substantially destroyed by fire, it was reconstructed in 1947 and had fallen into disuse by the 1970s. And it was famously saved by the Union Green Bands from demolition and comprehensively restored and adaptively modified by David Mariner and Peter Lovell to become a live theatre in the mid-90s. The current project involved further adaptations to further improve the capacity of the place to perform its role as a live theatre, in particular in relation to sightline adjustments to suit signature international performances and code compliance matters. The project impresses for its innovative engineering solution in the form of the massive three-dimensional clear spanning truss and its seamless envelopment in the new expertly painted traditional Venetian plasterwork detailed to match the extant signature finishes. These substantial but necessary interventions were developed via intense research and implemented with surgical precision, with the resultant exemplary conservation and consolidation of a sustainable, ongoing, compatible use for this key heritage place. There were also two commendations awarded for in the conservation section. The first was a mid-century 1960s modernist beach house of clear architectural mastery, but also hitherto unprotected by any formal statutory mechanism, where both the owners and their architects have nonetheless decided to adopt an appropriate and laudable process to manage the inevitable need for restoration and upgrade. From improving the thermal performance with double glazing and a new heating system, repairing the roof, to the careful removal and reinstatement of internal timber lining boards and canvas ceilings, there has been a consistent, informed and sympathetic light touch, which allows the integrity of this place and its original design intent to be masterfully retained intact. The Capitol Theatre, the RMIT Capitol Theatre project, is a successful and sensitive series of conservation measures which have given this iconic place, designed by the Griffins and which is of possible World Heritage significance, a new lease of life where it had previously fallen into disrepair. Appropriate documentary and physical research, clear evidence-based conservation and code compliance-driven interventions, including the reproduction carpet based on a found relic, modern lighting, upgraded bathrooms, decorative hard plaster repairs, and multimedia installations have successfully enabled the remnant auditorium and lobby spaces to be deployed for contemporary, tertiary, university, and other public meetings and activities while honouring the Griffin-Mahoney legacy. And finally, Arts House and Studio by Zen Architects. This reasonably intact but degraded late Victorian double-fronted timber dwelling overlooked for formal heritage recognition again. So of the 8 projects given awards, 4 of them were for properties that had no statutory recognition or statutory heritage protection. Nonetheless, a fine example of its type has been voluntarily saved, restored, and masterfully adapted to contemporary standards. The owners, with a desire to maintain a cohesive historic heritage character to the street, despite a lack of will of the local authority, in combination with Zen Architects motivated to recycle and interpret, have mostly followed the conventional approach of retaining sufficient of the front portion to enable ongoing respectful legibility while adding a rear addition and new interior. Perhaps relieved of the sometimes limiting constraints of heritage planning policy, the result positively sings in its contemporary tune in harmony with the retained heritage character, with not a sign of historicist genuflection. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. And if we could, stop sharing your screen, that's great. And we've now got some time for some questions. And I have to say, we've got a lot of questions, which is really wonderful. I'm going to go to a first one, which may be difficult for all of us to answer, but Noni Boyd is watching from New South Wales, and she's asked, when the borders reopen, would it be possible to hold a behind-the-scenes visit for the upgrades of the public buildings? Colleagues here in New South Wales have engaged in upgrading public buildings for councils, would really appreciate seeing these award-winning projects and talking to the architects and heritage specialists about the process and the conservation decision making. I'm wondering what sort of mechanism is there for visits, and how would one organise this?
Philip, it's Pete here.
Right.
I think that Open House do a great job of that. We've been involved in several Open House events, and we did an online one this year, but hopefully next year we can do an in-person tour.
Yeah, so I think that's perhaps the best answer to that, and I'll certainly make a note and talk to people at Open House, because I think if possible, that's the best way for people interstate to come and see these facilities. As for individual architects and councils, I think it's better to make direct connection with them. What's amazing, I think, about today's presentation is that we have so many good jobs across a whole range of scales and structures.
Look, just to add to that, Trades Hall has a tour online for those who wish to do it. There is actually that, and there's no question on the Regent and Trades Hall, they'd be welcome to organise something totally available.
Fantastic. Now, I'm going through many questions here, and one of them in particular from Felicity Watson struck me, and this is for all of the panellists. A key aspect of significance for many of these projects is social significance. Fed Square, Broadmeadows Town Hall, the Capitol, Trades Hall and the Regent. They've all got rich historic and also contemporary connections. And Felicity's asked, how do we better engage the community in planning for heritage places? How do we advocate for community input to be included as part of the design and planning processes? Perhaps, Kerstin, if we start with you, because I was intrigued as to know, was it the local community who expressed a desire to keep the original building?
Yes, it was, and that was part of a campaign from decades ago. But I think that's a really good question about how to involve community. And I think with Broadmeadows, the thing we really learnt from that is just how important stories are and the collection of stories that are associated with place. So if there are ways to gather those, to record those, then it's easier for them to be acknowledged and engaged with in any future works that happen. So that's where we valued the work that Hume Council had done in terms of working with community to gather some of those stories, and which are in the Fishbowl Media's film, which some of those stills I showed were from. So that's the first thing I would say, is just to be aware of the stories and to find ways to hold those, because that's something we as designers can certainly work with. And one of our biggest problems is loss of stories associated with place, which means really important places are ignored for the wrong reasons, or perhaps the wrong things remembered or emphasised.
Sure, thanks. Anyone else want to add to that answer?
I can add a little bit to that. I definitely think you have to be creative about finding the stories. I mean, there's a lot of really important events that happened at Fed Square. They became part of the social stories. We had an incredible advocate, a guy called Simon Toulis, who'd initially been an events coordinator in the very early days of Fed Square, and he put together this amazing spreadsheet of all these events, important events that had happened there. And you can find these stories through strange ways. So I mentioned our petition comments. So we held 2 of the petitions, and there were the most beautiful comments on those petitions that just absolutely moved me. Some of them were very simple, just hands off our Fed Square, you know, this real sense of, you know, the fact that it's ours. And some of them were like personal anecdotes of being there or working there and why it was so important. And so we managed to mine that for information, and it was unexpected. It was very unexpected. And then there are also kind of other little things that you can draw on that are maybe more symbolic. So we also put forward the fact that the City of Melbourne logo and the fabric for public transport is actually drawn from the facades of Fed Square. So it becomes a kind of a symbolic thing within the city, and that becomes part of the social significance as well. So it was a really interesting thing to find creative ways of really drawing all of that out.
Right, thank you, Tania. Peter, one of the Peters.
Yeah, I think, Philip, one of the interesting challenges for any heritage professional is that social engagement and engagement of communities more often than not is a product of conflict, that it is produced, as Tania has really reflected. The reality is that these fabulous stories underlying the bottom-up approach to Fed Square came out of a conflict situation. And in many respects, that is what happens. And the challenge you're faced with is how to get that without being in a conflict situation. To take a place to say, all right, what is the community that belongs to this place, loves it, cherishes it? What are the stories? Because I think otherwise it tilts in a way. And I think there is a huge challenge that we all face in how to really get that to come forward without simply being in a position of having a fight. And
yeah.
So that,
yeah,
Actually,
great comment, Peter. Kirsten, did you want to add?
I was just simply going to say, Peter, I think that's a really good observation. And maybe one of the things with Broadmeadows that was useful was that the Art Commission was a means for some of that engagement to happen. And if you like, that was framed less about resolving a conflict and more about an invitation to share stories. So even that as a process, I think, opened up a way to capture stories, which is quite different had it been the other way around. So I think that's the potential of artworks to possibly enable that process.
Right, Peter, MALATT, did you want to add to that?
Well, I would, Philip. I mean, we've heard a few stories about how many of these buildings have been saved by public movements and activities of very senior people in the community to stop them being demolished in the booms of Melbourne. But great heritage buildings have lots and lots of contact with so many people, and you get these stories that come out. With the Capitol, one was from Adam Elliott, who was a great supporter of RMIT and their fundraising. He's an Academy Award winner, and he describes his very vivid memory of first attending the Capitol with his father to see Police Academy 2, and didn't really take much notice of the movie, but the space just blew him away. And the other one was Auntie Caroline Briggs, who's an elder of the Melbourne Indigenous community, who did the smoking ceremony to open the building, and to everyone's surprise, related the story that her uncle was Melbourne's only Aboriginal projectionist, and he worked there. He was trained and worked at the Capitol, and he used to sneak them in to see movies. You know, those stories, they're really part of the fabric of Melbourne. It's not just the buildings. It's all of the people and the memories that they hold of those buildings.
Yeah, oh, great. I've got another question now from Queensland, actually, which shows I'm so pleased with the reach of today's session. Andrew Ladley from Queensland says, greetings from sunny Queensland. We're all jealous. But he says, I note that 4 out of the 4 out of 8 awarded projects were not formally heritage listed, which is interesting. And a particular note, you know, it was extraordinary that the Carnegie House by McGlashan and Everest, which Sarah Stribley so beautifully restored, was not even listed. But Andrew's asking, how is it decided whether a place is eligible in the heritage category of the awards program? So I don't know whether, Roger, you can answer that. But what it means is that the architects who are entering these unlisted projects in the awards program are recognising something, that's where their project should lie. And they're not actually necessarily heritage listed buildings or sites or places.
I think across the awards spectrum, all the categories, we often see single projects nominated for several different categories, and I think the short answer is it's really up to the nominee which category they wish to participate in. I don't believe anybody is likely to submit a project to the heritage category without having considered the criteria that are going to be applied to considering it as a heritage-worthy award. And that is that there is inherently a backstory that has been researched. There has been a careful, much more careful perhaps than a greenfield site might demand approach to the physical interventions that are proposed. But there are no particular limitations. Whether your property is heritage listed or not clearly doesn't really matter.
I'm just wanting to just add something to that. Sometimes I often think there is no site outside of heritage, and a mistake that designers make is thinking that there is such a thing as heritage-free zones. And so I sometimes think it'd be great if in the future, in the way that I'd love to think all projects had ESD imperatives, so we didn't need an ESD award, that one day we might not need heritage awards as such, because it's just recognised we're always building on some kind of legacy, and that can take so many forms. So it's an interesting one. The whole thing is a category.
Sure. Now, this is a very practical question we've had from one of our audience, thanking everyone for the presentation, but they're asking Peter MALATT and Peter Lovell, budget and final cost for the restoration of the Regent and the Capitol.
I've typed in an answer to that one. I think we were about $12 million construction, which is not bad over about 4,000 square metres. But adding on all the audio visual, which is significant, I think they clocked up about 19 million investment in the end. Yep.
Right. And Peter?
If it'll be interesting, not dissimilar figures. I think the base cost of the Regent was about 12 million. And then there was probably another 2 or 3 on top of that. So it's in that sort of area, same territory.
Sure. A question for Tania. What's the next focus? What's next for citizens of Melbourne?
We're not sure yet. We're looking at different things. It's all been a bit tricky with COVID. But at the moment, we're really kind of keeping in touch with public space. The public spaces of our city, I think, have never been more important, as we've all discovered in lockdown down here. I know not everybody who's listening is where we are, but we do think that there is a real space to kind of be active in this, and hopefully something positive that's come out of COVID is everybody has realised how much they value just getting out and about. It's been wonderful to see people outside.
Thank you. And we've had some incredibly good responses from the Q&A section here. Someone from Canberra, thank you so much for the online presentation. today. I don't have a question, but want to congratulate the organisers. That's okay, that's very nice. But the speakers, and importantly to celebrate a terrific range of special heritage and advocacy projects. That's from Rachel Jackson of GML in Canberra and Canberra Modern. I want to just ask a couple more questions and try and vary them so that we're not missing any entirely here. Let me just quickly rush down. I'm sorry, there are so many of them. Someone has asked, are the AIA Victorian Architecture Awards open to all registered architects in Victoria? If not, why not? And I presume that means that you have to be a member of the Institute to enter the awards. Is that right, Roger?
That's correct, Philip.
Right.
That is correct. Yeah.
Right.
You have to be a member of the Institute to enter the Architecture Awards.
Right. Okay.
There are other awards that are open to all architects. I think the Premier's Awards. Maybe there's a state government award. There might even be a Heritage Vic Award. Is there? No.
Right. Okay.
I think the Bates Smart Award though is open to a whole range of
other people.
Yes. So that's probably the only one though.
Yes. Yeah. And look, a question here from Emily Moss. Do you ever come across heritage engineers in your line of conservation work, or collaborate with engineers? And I guess this is a question perhaps particularly relevant to you, Peter Lovell, about with the Regent, but just generally, are there specialist heritage engineers that you're dealing with?
Philip, yeah, there are certainly at least 3 or 4 engineers who specialise in heritage buildings, and it certainly is a discipline, and it's one where it would be great if there were some more. But within any of the major engineering practices that we deal with, there are usually individuals who have that particular skill or interest. But yes, there are specialists in the area. Yeah.
Right. Well, now we've reached the end of our session, and there are lots more questions. But look, I'm going to bring it all to a close because otherwise I don't want Zoom to disappear on us all. But I'd like to thank all of our presenters today, to thank Roger BEESTON as chair of the jury, TANIA DAVIDGE for her work with the citizens of Melbourne, for KERSTIN THOMPSON for winning the Victorian Architecture Medal and getting heritage there right at the top, for Peter MALATT for doing a wonderful job with 6 degrees at RMIT University, and for Peter Lovell for 2 exemplary projects. As usual, I'd have to say, Peter. And I'd like to thank Theo Blankley of ACAHUCH and also Simon Elclub of the MSD for organising today's session, the ACAHUCH Heritage Session. I hope everyone has enjoyed it immensely. I believe it has been recorded, and I'm hoping so anyway. And I have to say, given the breadth of entries, it looks like heritage and architecture are doing reasonably well in Victoria. So thanks everyone, and I hope you enjoyed today's session.